declared ceasefire. These are the main
recent 24-hour period ending at 1800 hours only yesterday. In that single day, we received 6 reports of killings in Kosovo, including reports of a mass execution at Pastrik, in the bottom left corner, and also the execution of 35 civilians at Sopi, slightly to the top right of Pastrik. This is on top of the long charge sheet of war crimes which have been notched up by Milosevic's forces in the past 2 weeks. President Milosevic claimed that he offered his truce to mark the holy days of Easter. How dare he pray in aid a holy day after the butchery with which he celebrates each day? There's one simple test whether he really has repented. Let him agree to let in the War Crimes Tribunal to investigate these atrocities and the others of the past fortnight. Let there be justice for those who have been murdered or deported over that fortnight. I warn those carrying out his policy that it will be no defense to say they were following orders. We know the names of the 5 colonels of the Pristina Army Corps. They will be held to account however long it takes for what their units have done. There is no statute of limitation on war crimes. While the war has gone on in Kosovo, here in Britain, we have convicted a man for war crimes 50 years ago. The message to those commanders is clear. You will never sleep free from the fear of justice, and the sooner you stop the atrocities, the better it will be for you. Now, Air Marshal Sir John Day.
Good afternoon. Aid workers say they're desperately worried about the fate of tens of thousands of refugees who disappeared overnight from their camp in Macedonia. Up to 30,000 were bussed out, apparently to other countries. The camp now stands empty. In other moves, it's reported that the Yugoslav President Slobodan Milosevic has offered to hand back the 3 captured American soldiers through Cyprus as a goodwill gesture. These are the main developments today.
The United Nations High Commission for Refugees says it still can't account for the fate of up to 30,000 refugees who have disappeared from their camp on the border in Macedonia. They were put on buses overnight and apparently taken to Albania and to Turkey. Some, it seems, were taken by train to Greece.
The acting president of Cyprus says Yugoslavia's President Milosevic has offered to hand back the 3 American airmen it captured as a gesture of goodwill. Spiros Kyprianou says he's going to Belgrade for a meeting and that Milosevic had shown willingness to hand over the men.
Around 150 warplanes have been in action over Belgrade, Novi Sad, Pristina and the Montenegrin capital Podgorica. Their targets appear to have been military airports and installations and a chemical factory. For the first time, NATO aircraft have successfully attacked armoured vehicle columns in Kosovo.
Hospitals in Albania are being swamped by casualties from the fighting in Kosovo. Many of the victims are children with gunshot wounds. Doctors say medical services are at breaking point. European leaders meet in Luxembourg later today to discuss the refugee crisis.
The United Nations says up to 30,000 refugees in Macedonia are unaccounted for. They were moved under cover of darkness from no man's land on the border with Kosovo. There's speculation they could have been taken to Albania or even Greece. Aid workers are also trying to find out what's happened to some 60,000 refugees who were on the other side of the border. Many of them have vanished too. Sky's Emma Hurd has sent us this report from Blace.
You can hear birdsong now in this field where for days there's only been the sound of human suffering. Overnight, some 20,000 people were moved out of the squalor here. Tens of thousands more have passed through on their exodus from Kosovo. Only now the people have gone can we really see just what they had to endure. Some were here for 3 days before being taken to NATO camps. They were forced to leave behind many possessions, among them family photographs, pictures of happier times left abandoned in the mud. Few will ever forget their time here, days without food, surrounded by mud and human excrement, the dead and dying being carried out around them. The sick and the old are now the only ones left. Huddled in a medical tent, they lie in their own urine and waste. Nafisi Marina is 70 years old. She told me her children were ordered to leave her behind because she was ill and couldn't walk. All are now separated from their families. No one seems to know who's going to care for them.
We've asked the authorities to find some kind of placement for the people or help them to get reunited with their families, and we haven't had any response. And it's really a terrible tragedy. People that are in this part of their lives, that have worked all their lives, to have to suffer like this and lose their families, it's just heartbreaking.
The border crossing from Kosovo is eerily quiet. Aid agencies believed 60,000 refugees were waiting to cross into Macedonia, but this morning we couldn't see any. They too would have ended up in this camp. What's not clear is where they've gone, perhaps to Albania or even back into Kosovo. Emma Hurd, Sky News, on the Macedonian-Kosovo border.
Well, Sky's Keith Gray.
Kosovo into Albania. Refugees were told it was safe for them to return home because of the unilateral ceasefire, but those who've already fled are unlikely to believe the Serbs. Sky's Ross Appleyard has been hearing their stories.
Children have been very much in the front line of this conflict. The hospital in Kukas bears testimony to the suffering of the youngsters of Kosovo. A child shot in the face is lucky to be alive. The bullet passed in one side and out the other. Another suffered shrapnel wounds when a grenade was thrown into his village. This little boy lost his nose. The doctors here work around the clock. When they finish, they help the refugees who continue to queue outside.
Today I am tired because I work in the hospital, in polyclinic, in the 22 hours on diet. And where I go in house, I have about 20 refugees from Kosovo.
The director of the hospital told me these children would recover from their wounds, but not from the emotional scars that went with them. Even eyes that have seen much in life can't have witnessed the horror these children have faced. A ceasefire may have been called in Kosovo, but that'll mean little to the children of the region. The trauma they've seen will never be forgotten and will undoubtedly refuel the traditional hatred between Albanian and Serb for generations to come. Ross Appleyard, Sky News reports.
The U.S. has said no to the ceasefire offer, but will the other NATO allies break ranks? The U.S. is so worried Defense Secretary Bill Cohn is heading to NATO headquarters. NBC News has learned several NATO countries sympathetic to Milosevic even wanted to accept his offer today. Why are allies sympathetic to Serbia? Italy, only 150 miles from Yugoslavia, fears Serb retaliation and a flood of refugees. Greece shares Serbia's religion. Hungary has 350,000 ethnic Hungarians in Serbia. NATO sources say their objections have slowed the air war from day one, the result of fighting a war by committee.
One can look at the selection of targets in Belgrade. One can also look at the decision not to have earlier deployment of ground forces in the area or to actually use the Apache to go in with targets in Kosovo itself.
In fact, U.S. officials tell NBC News General Wesley Clark, NATO's supreme commander, complained strongly that it took weeks to get approval to use Apache helicopters. Now they won't even get there for another 2 weeks. By then, Milosevic will have forced most Albanians out of Kosovo. And military sources say prime targets have not been hit because of politicians worrying about civilian casualties. Targets like Milosevic's ruling party headquarters.